sort of thanking everybody for coming. I don't have the announcement in front of me right now, but just thanking everybody for coming. Thank you, Judy Heumann. It is an honor to be joined by you today. Really glad to have Lindsay and Faranmi, Dr. Okunlami, joining us to have more of a fireside chat with you. I want everybody to know that you are more than welcome to ask questions throughout the event. You can add a question to the chat. It might be a way that we can make sure that all voices, as many voices as want to be heard or want to ask a question, can ask their question. And as we move forward, Lindsay and Dr. Okunlami will be reviewing the chat and making sure your question is asked to the best of their ability. And just thank you all for coming, and I will sort of hand it over to Tess Kirchner, who is the president of a new student association at the School of Nursing, who will introduce our moderators and our speaker and make an announcement about her student organization. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tess Kirchner. As president of Disability Nursing Association, the UMSN's newest student organization, I'm proud to sponsor today's event. DNA is a place where students with disabilities and neurodivergent conditions, as well as their allies, can discuss and overcome barriers, as well as experience a sense of community. We invite everyone passionate about this mission to register for our group by emailing Megan Belansky at meganbel@umich.edu. This conversation will be led by UMSN Class of 2008 BSN alumna Lindsay Freisinger. She is currently completing her doctoral degree with a focus on educating healthcare providers on the care of people with disabilities. Her background includes pediatric ICU, trauma ICU, and anesthesia. 8 years ago, she was involved in a car accident resulting in a cervical spinal cord injury. This event has given her an insight into disability and driven her passion for improving health and wellness in the disability community. Also joining the conversation is Dr.
Excuse me one second, Tess. Some of you have not put your mic, muted your mic. If some of you who don't yet have your mics muted, thank you.
Also joining the conversation is Dr. Okunlami, who is an assistant professor of family medicine, physical medicine and rehabilitation, and urology at Michigan Medicine, director of services for students with disabilities, the SSD, and director of adaptive sports and fitness within the division of student health at the University.
I want to go over a couple things. Now, Michael, do you want to hold on to his balloon?
He also serves as the director of adaptive sports in the Michigan Center for Human Athletic Medicine and Performance and is a spokesperson for Guardian Life in their Equal and Able partnership. Dr. O was born in Nigeria before immigrating to the U.S. at a young age. He attended high school at Deerfield Academy and college at Stanford University, where he also ran track and field, serving as captain his last 2 years and achieving academic All-American recognition. He then earned his MD from the University of Michigan before matching into orthopedic surgery at Yale. At the beginning of his 3rd year, he experienced a spinal cord injury, paralyzing him from the chest down. After 2 surgeries and intense rehabilitation, he was blessed with some return of motor function.
Okay. So I'm Lindsay Freisinger, and I'm going to introduce Judy, and then we'll start our little fireside chat here with Judy, Faranmi, and myself. Judy Heumann is a lifelong advocate for the rights of disabled people. She contracted polio in 1949 and was denied the right to attend school because she was called a fire hazard at the age of 5. She is now internationally recognized leader in the disability rights community. She's been featured in Netflix's Crip Camp documentary, and she is the author of Being Human, an Unrepentant Memoir of Disability Rights Activist. Ms. Heumann has shaped significant disability rights legislation, particularly as a member of the U.S. State Department during the Obama administration, serving as special advisor for international disability rights. In addition to 6 honorary doctorate degrees, Judy Heumann graduated from Long Island University in Brooklyn, New York in 1969 and received her master's in public health from the University of California at Berkeley in 1975. Okay, so Fermi and Judy, I guess it's time for us to start. I guess it's time for us to start having a chat here.
Can I say one thing? A few of you still don't have your mics muted. So if you could all check, that'd be great. Thank you, Lindsay, very much. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. I am very much especially excited to have you. One of the things that I really wanted to highlight is, first of all, I've read your book twice. I just read it again before this chat because I just wanted to refresh myself on all of the amazing things that you've done. But you have spearheaded many initiatives that have helped people with disabilities to become a part of normal society. And I want to thank you because without the Section 504 that you fought for, without the ADA, I wouldn't be in nursing today because of my acquired disability. And I think Fermi may share the same sentiment that, you know, both of us are here in the medical profession with disability because of the work that you've done. So I really want to thank you for that. I kind of wanted to get a sense of what life was like for you before Section 504 and the ADA and after.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And Lindsay and I were talking a little bit this morning, and one of the comments that I was making to her is when you think about this gathering today, where the 2 moderators are professionals in the healthcare industry, a doctor and a nurse, that is in and of itself a very big statement about the changes that have been made. I'm going to be 74. Oh my God, in 16 days. It's like amazing. And it is because of the work that so many people have done over the decades. There were a group of people in Michigan that I did work with many years ago in the 70s. Eric, Judy, and I'm embarrassed to say that I don't remember their last names, but they were doing really great work on campus, really pushing for many of the things that you're both benefiting from now, but also the next steps that you're all working on about how to really continue to move forward on the inclusion of disability in all the professions. And what we're discussing today has to do with the healthcare professions plus. So what was life like? Well, there were no curb cuts, there were no ramps. You never want to say no, but basically, no, bathrooms weren't accessible. Never even expected, you know, when I was younger, that that would become the norm. But I think one of the values for those of you who have seen Crip Camp or read my book or many other books and some other films that are out there, you can see that really after the Second World War, there was a bubbling up of people learning from what was going on with other movements, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the anti-war movement, the aging movement. All of these movements were really emerging because of one thing or another: racism, what we used to call handicapism, now called ableism, homophobia, And as groups get together, we've been able to make some changes in the case of disabled people. I would say the changes in the laws have been very dramatically positive. Implementation is still not yet where it needs to be. But I remember my mother was on an advisory board for a big hospital in Brooklyn. And I remember when they accepted a wheelchair user to study in psychiatry, to become a doctor in psychiatry, and how my mother commented on how, that was something that was very different, because at that point we didn't have ADA, and the Section 504 statute really was beginning to make changes, because couldn't discriminate against someone based on disability if the entity was a recipient of federal funds. So all schools, universities, hospitals are recipients. And so you slowly began to see some changes, which may be a little bit faster now, but still pretty slow. So how has life changed? Disabled people are organizing more. We feel more empowered as a group of people. The more our voices grow, the more we recognize that we're not the problem, and that we really take this onion and peel it and look at all the different layers and changes that need to be made. I think that's where we're continuing not only to see changes, but a growing dissatisfaction on the part of disabled people ourselves about being excluded. And I also want to say that, the term ally, I think more and more people are also recognizing not only the importance of complying with the law, but I think more people are recognizing a couple of things. One, it is the right thing to do to enable people who at the university level, for example, are qualified to meet the academic requirements to study in a plethora of fields, that discrimination is something that should be removed. And also, I think slowly more people are recognizing that disability is something that is a natural occurrence. We can do things that may be preventing disability, like seatbelts, like, not allowing drunk drivers, like having speed limits, like pushing issues like eating appropriately and those types of things. But people will continue to acquire disabilities for any one of a number of reasons. And I think as more people really begin to recognize that what we in the disability community are arguing for, universal design plus more, is something that more people really are accepting. And I think one of the ways, this may sound strange, but the American Association of Retired People, like before, I don't know, maybe sometime in the 2000s, you would never see them advertising a scooter or a cane or God knows diapers or anything like that. And in my lifetime, the changes that we see about things that are advertised, when I first saw diapers being advertised on television, literally, I almost had a heart attack. I could not believe that something like that was going to be advertised. Then to find out that one of the reasons why there's so many diapers that are being sold is because people with diabetes and other types of disabilities may have continence issues or incontinence issues. And so we've normalized going into a store and not only buying diapers, but pull-up diapers. And we've normalized, women pulling pants up over a diaper and shaking their booty on TV and going out and climbing and doing all these things, which really something unfathomable. And I think that is really an important issue that allows us as disabled people to talk about these types of things, and how what we're talking about is kind of equivalent. It's like looking at what people need in order to unleash people's ability to continue to be active in their community, or in some cases to begin to become active because they might not have been active before. So I think there's a growing understanding that people shouldn't feel ashamed of having their disability visible or invisible. Not that we've achieved where we need to go, certainly in the invisibility area, but things are moving forward. So yeah, those are some of the changes.
And this is Fermi speaking. You know, I've said this to you already, Judy. I said it during our prep call. I announced it during one of the keynotes that we had here for Michigan, but for those that haven't heard it, I'll repeat the story. I'll talk about what Judy has done for me personally in my own sort of journey as what I called a reformed ableist, because it was in my own now only 8 years, as I now live in this world of disability, and as I call it, on both sides of the stethoscope. But the issue is that as a physician, I think this is helpful in this context because we talk about healthcare with a nurse and a physician on the panel, but medicine and healthcare specifically, I think, have a long way to go in terms of supporting that conversation. And I perpetuated it myself because during my recovery from my spinal cord injury, I was hyper-focused on returning to function. I was hyper-focused on walking again. And so I think I put a lot of energy towards that being important to me. And I think that the nuanced conversation that we need to have is that while people shouldn't be discouraged from wanting to then have whatever sort of function that they do have, we also have an ability to then change the stigma that exists in disability and the fact that some people never had the ability to walk or lost the ability to walk, and that is okay. Once again, we are not the problem. It is the lived environment that is not accessible. That is something that we need to recognize. And so she helped me with that in a very direct way. And I think any of you that have been on the call for this 21 minutes can see she has no problems with speaking up when she's like, listen, you're not muted. You need to, I want my zucchini noodles. Judy is great. And she straight up called me out when she said that the work that she watched still was demonstrating the fact that even myself, as someone who now claims to be another advocate and ally, identifying as an individual with a disability, I even was not accepting my own new sort of body and was perpetuating this ableist mindset of that I'm not going to be as worthwhile in this body of work that I'm doing. I'm not going to be able to make as much of an impact if I don't recover this function. Everyone wants to see that inspirational story of the person who was this athlete who then fought back and is now walking. And I think healthcare has to then hold these two truths in the same space, right? We do, as a physical medicine and rehab faculty, we don't want to discourage rehabilitation, but what we do want to then make sure people recognize is that not everyone is going to then have that same endpoint, and that is okay. Regardless of whether this is physical mobility, whether this is neurodivergent conversations, that visible and invisible disabilities, there's not a standard of what normal should be. There's not a standard of what wellness should look like. And that is what we need to do. And that is what you helped start in this country in terms of the legislature that's being pushed forward, but normalizing these sort of different body minds of what disability should and can look like and represent, and saying that that does not make people any less capable, any less valuable. That is what Judy has helped me do. And so I think it's great to then have her here. And I want to thank, the School of Nursing, the Council for Disability Concerns, Office for Health Equity and Inclusion, and then our office, Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services, as well as Tessa's new student group, for pulling all of these folks together to have this conversation. And so I do want, before I pass it back to Lindsay, I want to continue to mention to all of you that please feel free to put things in the chat. We're watching it because I see some comments that are coming. Lindsay has some questions because Judy made it really clear she wants this to be a conversation. She doesn't just want this to be a talk or a speech that she gives. So we have an opportunity to talk to Judy, but if you all have questions that you want to pose as well, please feel free to put them in there and we'll address them, but I'll pass it back over to Lindsay.
Thank you. So I'm going to kind of jump off of what Fermi was talking about there, which is kind of the before and after. I've been injured. I was injured 8 years ago. I've been an incomplete quadriplegic now for 8 years. Prior to that, I did pediatric ICU nursing, trauma ICU nursing, and anesthesia. And the roles that I was in was very much the medical model of either we've fixed you and cured you, or we've failed and you go to rehab, and we kind of forget, like, you know, the nurses that work in acute care kind of forget about, okay, that patient is no longer super critical, they're gone. And I never thought about what happens after the intensive care unit. What happens after we stabilize this person and they go home with a spinal cord injury or an amputation or, you know, some type of acquired disability. And I was smacked in the face with the reality of what that meant to go home with a significant disability. And my home was not accessible, and I gouged out huge, you know, areas in my walls with my chair and whatnot, and had to deal with my own internalized ableism and, you know, I'm going to walk again, I'm going to run again, this isn't going to get me down. And then over the years, recognizing that, no, this is completely, it's a normal part of my human experience. And disability should be much more normalized in our society, where when I go out in public, I'm not a spectacle. I still feel that sometimes I'm very much a spectacle when I go out of, oh my gosh, it's so good to see you out. And I'm like, I'm grocery shopping. I'm living a normal life with the, you know, with the adaptive equipment that I have, which was made possible by the ADA and Section 505. I mean, those kinds of things, you know, being able to grocery shop, having the doors open for me, things like that. I take that for granted because I never experienced not having those things. So, you know, that's kind of my sense of the before and after. And I dealt with some discrimination when trying to get back into anesthesia school. They knew that I could stand with crutches, so they made my wheelchair an infection control issue. And so I was not allowed to use my wheelchair to do the skills test to try and get back in. And I lost my balance, and they pulled out the technical standards that I had signed well before my accident. And the technical standards said must maintain balance at all times. So therefore I was, you know, asked to withdraw from the program. And at that time, I was only a year and a half out from my injury. I didn't have those support systems in place or the knowledge to know that I had some more rights probably to, you know, to finish that degree. So that's, you know, that's what's fueled me to then go into this realm of disability advocacy. And now talking about advocacy, Judy, what are your thoughts on discussions and advocacy efforts around, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is kind of a hot topic right now. But I've often noticed that disability can get left out of the conversation when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what are your thoughts on how do we start including disability in these conversations and the link to poverty as well?
Okay, so hold that part of the question.
Sorry.
No, nothing to apologize for. I think, you know, when, you know, so I was 18 months old when I had polio. I was a kid. I was, you know, just beginning to walk. I was just beginning to talk, although I think I'd been talking for a while by the time I was 18 months old. But my point in all this is, I think we need to also be cautious about the word ableist. Somebody is not muted. Somebody is not muted. Who is not muted?
Lori, there we
Okay.
go.
I think this is not based on my personal experience, but on observation, that when someone doesn't have a disability one day and it has a disability the next day, there are lots of things that you go through. And that one of the issues that the healthcare community needs to be addressing is not only stabilizing your life and allowing one to be able to, have as many interventions put in place to allow a person to move forward. But I think as a community, we need to recognize that as a healthcare community, and it does address a little of what you were saying, Lindsay, that when people are going through traumatic situations where their life is going to have a permanent change, it isn't, I understand, and that's what Rami was saying, when the film that he showed me emphasized so much on his walking. And I thought, I like the guy, he's really smart, he's really good intention, but dear God, this is not the message that I think he needs to, or he wants to put forward. And I'm speaking about this because when someone says to you that they're glad to see you in the community, for example, yes, it is very much based on their lack of exposure to what disabled people can do and the need to be able to have community discussions, allowing people to see that if they weren't seeing you in the community, that's something that they should have been thinking about. If they knew you and they knew you had an injury, seeing you was a surprise because they haven't seen enough of us in media just to expect us to be there. I think, from a health perspective, it's not that we need to be walking so that we look like other people, but we need to look at things like bone density. What can we do to prevent osteoporosis? And are we looking at weight bearing as something that we should be trying to do, not walking and not doing things that we're not able to do. And we shouldn't be made to feel like a second class person because we can't do what typical people do. So I think, what Lindsay was saying about how when she moved from being a nurse without a disability, and then when she was a patient, I hate the word patient. One of the reasons I hate the word patient, especially for people who have longer term disabilities, to me, patient means being patient. And I think in many ways, we don't want people to be patient. We want people to really have a vision of where they want to go, and that people who are complacent or are afraid to speak up. And I think that's really a lot of what this is. We need to be training people from when they are a part of the medical, whether they're visiting a doctor in an office or in a hospital or other healthcare providers. We need to be able to have deeper discussions, and the healthcare community itself needs to be much more knowledgeable about resources that exist in the community. And I know that everybody is very busy, but I think being able to refer people to make sure that people are linking up with peer support groups or whatever it may be that they need, and following up on, did you do this? Was it beneficial? And just looking at these issues as something that in many cases are going to go on. It's not that you just move from A to B and that A is no longer relevant. So I think Lindsay's other question, which I haven't answered yet. Lindsay, are you there?
I think Lindsay had to step out for a second. So
okay.
I think, but I
yeah,
do think,
I'm here. I'm just
Lindsay, just tell me the question that you asked.
What are your thoughts on the discussions and advocacy efforts around diversity and their link to poverty and disability?
So I think, we're kind of unique in the health arena, public health, et cetera. It's really, I think, we need to be more a part of the systems that are looking at issues around healthcare disparities. And when we look at issues around disability and poverty, as an example, we need to be a part of the knowledge base that is doing research on what is happening, for example, to what are the risk factors for poorer people, and then looking at, in the area of disability specifically, where do we see higher incidence of certain types of disabilities occurring? What could we have been doing to prevent things like risky behavior, on and make it something which is not looking at per se preventing disability because disability is bad, but rather because we're looking at healthcare quality. And I think it's very clear that disability is linked to poverty, and that also may mean that there are certain populations of people in the country who are poorer than others, and that we need to be looking at what are some of the risk behaviors. Like, we know in our public school system that children who are Black or brown, who are not acting appropriately, quote unquote, in schools, and who may need other interventions, are not necessarily getting them. And those are the children that are at greater risk of being pulled out of a class and put into segregated classes by disability, and subsequently racially more weighted towards Black and brown children. And what we should be looking at, because when we go down that tunnel, we see that these children are dropping out of school at higher rates. They're winding up in juvenile facilities and adult facilities. And that when you look at the juvenile facilities and you see that 60 to 70% of these kids have some form of a disability, typically an invisible disability, in my view, this is not just an education issue, it's a healthcare issue. It's, you know, what has been happening with pediatricians and others to alert that these children are not obtaining the level of skill knowledge that they could be, because the system is not appropriately addressing them. And I think it's one of the reasons why I loved going to Berkeley and getting my degree in public health, because it really necessitated looking comprehensively at things that were going on that others didn't necessarily look at, and how these issues need to be pulled together. So why is a group like setting up a professional group of healthcare providers with disabilities so important? It's one, to allow these types of stories to be told more, but more pointedly, to really be demanding of universities and professional areas of work that we look at. It gets back to what you were asking around diversity and inclusion. We need to be looking at what is not yet currently happening with implementation of laws like 504 and the ADA. You know, in your case, Lindsay, where you were basically asked to drop out of the field of study that you were in, you were newly disabled. Likely nobody in your area of study had reached out to you and said, okay, these are things that you may not be able to do. Let's go over these. Let's look at how we can be doing these things differently so that you don't have to drop out of the program. And you didn't willingly drop out of the program. And my presumption is you believe very much that you could have been successful in that program. So to be able to take that experience and speak strongly about it, and really go back in and look at what caused this to happen. And even though the time for filing a complaint may have expired, that doesn't matter, because you want to use this as an example of what happened to you and what shouldn't happen again, and where there's a public statement in effect. So when I was denied my teaching license in 1971, I had gone to the American Civil Liberties Union. And before I even applied for my teaching license, and told them that I thought that I was going to have a problem because I didn't know any teachers in New York who had gotten their license, who were wheelchair users at the time of getting their license. And they said, oh, just go through school, finish, and if you have a problem, call us back. So I did. I took the courses I needed to take. I passed my written exam, I passed my oral exam, and I was failed on my medical exam, specifically because paralysis of both lower extremities, sequelae of poliomyelitis. So today that would have been a gross violation of the law, but there were no laws at that point. So I called the ACLU and I said, I'd like to come in and meet. And the guy says to me, I'll call you back. And he called me back and he said, no, they didn't need to meet with me because they didn't believe I'd been discriminated against. They believed that I was denied my license for medical reasons. Now, I raised this, Lindsay, in conjunction with what you were discussing, because I've told that story 1,000 times, because it's an important part of, talking about our histories. And this summer, I've been asked to do a talk for ACLU summer interns. And so I told this story. And about a month later, I get a letter from the head of the ACLU apologizing for what had happened. So, and ACLU has been doing great work now in the area of disability, but getting a letter 50 years after still makes me cry. So, it really is important that people learn from the discrimination they've caused, because it can help prevent it.
Yeah, I've often thought about writing just a op-ed type piece for the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists, just to get it out there that this happened, to somebody. I was 3 months away from graduation at that point, and they wouldn't even grant me my degree. So there was a lot of issues that I wasn't really aware of how discriminating they were, because I was still dealing with my own internalized ableism. And so they told me I couldn't do it. And therefore I was like, okay, well, I guess I can't do it, even though I felt like I could.
And you hadn't got, I don't know, but my presumption is in the rehabilitation you were getting, nobody ever talked to you about what are you studying now and what may you need? What questions do you have? So yeah. I do consider that a failure of the healthcare system.
Yeah,
that's a particular program.
I was actually very lucky in that I advocated for myself. And so we did things like get dummies and work on intubation and ventilating and all of those things while standing, because I knew the school was going to make me do that stuff. It was during what's called a fiber optic intubation, where you have to look through a camera and shut your eye with the other eye. And since I wasn't sitting and I was standing, and my balance is very visual now, that's what caused me to lose my balance. And I hadn't prepared for not having my vision, taken away from me. And so, that's where I was with that. But what happened with the school was, one thing that I had asked is, can I do lab time with somebody to go over what would be reasonable accommodations? And they would not allow that. And so I see now that that is very wrong. And they should have definitely allowed lab time and an instructor to work with me in the lab. And there was none of that. So, looking back, I know a lot of things could have been very different.
So I think the next time someone comes in to a hospital with whatever, really understanding the whole person is very important, and being able not to necessarily be able to give you an answer about whether what they're doing is legal or not, to be able to say, you may want to speak to so-and-so about this, just to give you, because most people most disabled people today, I'd bet a lot of money, may have heard of 504, may have heard of the ADA, but they don't know what they are.
Yeah.
And so people need to be getting basic information. And I think it's also very true that healthcare providers need to be getting basic training on all these issues, because you shouldn't be expected to know more than other people. But in order for you to do your jobs appropriately, you need to at least have a broad understanding of what the laws say and who you can refer people to. I mean, in a state like Michigan, where you've got a reasonable number of resources around disability law, et cetera, it's important.
Yeah. Now, in the interest of multiple modes of information sharing, like Patricia Anderson said, I know that Dr. Polarsky had indicated she wanted to say something. So if Dr. Polarsky is still around, please unmute and I'll let you chime in. And then right after that, Tom Hoatland had wanted to chat as well. And then we'll go to Jody's comment. So if we can go Carrie, Tom, and Jody to then allow you all to then just unmute and say what you'd like to say, please.
Hi, so I'm Carrie Polarsky. I'm a rehabilitation psychologist at Michigan Medicine. I have a neuromuscular disorder, congenital, and use a mobility scooter. I recently was, I also do work focused on disability adjustment within psychology. And I was recently reflecting kind of on my own process of disability adjustment. And I know when I was thinking about internalized ableism, I was really kind of focused on my internal struggle. But one of the things that I'm reminded of, because there was another comment in the chat about kind of concerns that people have about their capabilities being questioned. So I think that reflects a lot, even what I was facing in going to great lengths to do things and not ask for help, is that concern about, and a real concern, not just coming from within, but that your capabilities will be questioned and that you do have to go to great lengths to prove oneself. And so, you know, I think as I was blaming myself and thinking about my own internal struggle, I was failing to recognize why I was having that internalized ableism and where that was coming from. So I just wanted to kind of point that out and share that. And as another thing, as I was listening to Lindsay's story too, I know that there's been many situations that, you know, I just didn't even see the problems. And as I hear people tell their stories, it reminds me, or when I would tell my story, other people would be outraged. And I, you know, think again, why doesn't a person even realize those things? Because you're kind of accustomed to it in some way. But I think about Lindsay's story and many of my past experience, and I'm thinking, yes, we need to be outraged. We need to be upset about these things. And so I just wanted to bring those things up. And thank you so much, Judy. In reading your book, it reminded me about kind of just continuing, because these things take time. And also being here today reminds me how important it is that coming together with other people, because that's where our stories come together. And I'm energized to do the work as I'm hearing everyone. So thank you.
I think your points are great, Carrie. When I was denied my teaching license, and we've all got multiple stories like this, I very much was questioning, if I file a lawsuit and I get my license and I do a bad job, what will that mean? Will that mean that they'll never hire another person who uses a wheelchair again to be a teacher? And I knew that I didn't have all the training that other people had, in part because I had a disability and people had been saying to me, you know, they're never going to hire you as a teacher. So, you know, you knew on some level, or I knew on some level, that I was coming in with less knowledge and experience than I would have liked. And so there's all this rationalization going on. And exactly as you're saying, A, being able to discuss it, B, being able to get ideas from other people to allow ourselves to see that we're not alone. And one thing that I think is really important, in the healthcare field, is again, this issue of being able to link people to other people. So there are a number of people on this call, most of whom I don't know, many of you who will have similar stories, either personally or have clients or patients that you see who may not be talking to you about any of these issues, but may very well have these experiences. And it doesn't mean that they need to necessarily see a therapist on an ongoing basis. They may very much need to be linked up to another advocate, another person who can just have a 10, 15, 30-minute discussion with them to bolster them to move forward. But I completely agree with everything that everybody has said so far.
And as you talk about having someone else to talk to, I don't know if this is what Tom wanted to mention, but I know that Tom had raised his hand, and Tom has been one of the individuals that has been running sort of our spinal cord injury support group here. So Tom, if you're still available, I don't know if that's what you're going to mention or not, but please feel free to unmute and then chime in. Tell us a little bit about who you are for Judy and what your comment or question was.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thank you again, Judy, for all you've done and for making time for us today. It was one of the comments I wanted to make as far as the power of peer mentoring. I was injured 30 years ago, 30 years ago this Christmas from a gunshot wound, and so I'm a T2 paraplegic, and I've been mentoring since I was still a patient on the inpatient unit at University of Michigan, and I've been doing it ever since, whether it be a virtual or in-person support group facilitation, or the countless numbers of individuals with spinal cord injuries and their families. But what came to mind as we were talking, I hadn't thought about this in quite a while, but I worked for a well-known foundation that their mission was to find a cure for paralysis for spinal cord injuries. And some of the rhetoric that came out of that foundation was just, we will not rest until we get rid of all these chairs. We will not rest until anyone needs a chair ever again. These were comments that were made, and that was the message of this foundation actually written out. And I just was forever battling internally about, there's nothing wrong with my chair. I use it to—
You may need a better chair, but there's nothing wrong with the chair.
Yeah, exactly. And I eventually left because it was falling on deaf ears that being in a chair was okay, and that I was okay, and so were all the people that I was mentoring, and hadn't thought about that in years until I think Jeremy said something that sort of sparked that nerve that I had.
I think it's another very important point, and it is something we need to be talking with people about, because, as I said, we know when people wear seatbelts, when people cross on green, when people don't drink and drive, that we see the incidence of certain types of disabilities go down. That shouldn't mean that for those people who were hit by a drunk driver or whatever, that their life should be seen as not valuable. And allowing people who are, I don't know anything about this group, but let's say they were helping people get wheelchairs, right? So the goal shouldn't be that there are no more wheelchairs that need to be given, right? The goal should be that people who use wheelchairs need to get the best wheelchairs so they can maximize their life. And we need to allow people, but I think it may be worth it for you to look, not you, but people in general. I did a piece on Trevor Noah. It's March 4th, 2020, like right before the shutdown. And in our dialogue, he used the word non-disabled. He used the word able-bodied. And I don't like that word. I don't like using the word able. And so I said to him, I use the word non-disabled. And it was a very quick back and forth. And I said, because the likelihood that you will have a temporary or permanent disability over the course of your life is high. And he said, are you threatening me? And but what I think is very important about the use of the word threatening is that is the word that most people think about when they think about aging or disability. They feel vulnerable and threatened. And in my view, people don't draw to things they feel vulnerable to or threatened by. And I think we need to allow people to really think about the adverse effect that their actions are having. So when this organization is trying to do, let's assume what they're trying to do was good. But by saying what they were saying about getting rid of wheelchairs, what impact it has on you and so many of us, because it is this message that says our lives are not equally valued. And people really need to think about why they're saying that. And if they needed a wheelchair, would they feel less valued or less worthy of living a good life? So some of these discussions, I think, are really important. And actually in the healthcare field, the rehab field, et cetera, people really need to grapple with these issues. Because, as a white, disabled Jewish woman, an issue I've worked on for many years in the Jewish community is, how disabled Jews experience participating in various, in the synagogue, in Jewish day schools, in Jewish activities. And I think it's been really helpful for more than a decade now that more synagogues are really looking at issues that disabled people within the synagogues are raising. But also, I think it's valuable for people who maybe never consider themselves to have a disability and maybe don't ever have to consider themselves to have a disability, but who may be getting older and can't do things like get their coat on and off, put their talit on, be able to get a book that has large print or whatever it is. It's like integrating this. And I'm really sorry, I've got another event at 1.
Yeah, so I know in the interest of time with your 3 minutes left, I'm going to now, Jody, I know you well, Jody. So I'm going to ask you, Jody, for a 1-minute statement, Jody. And then I'm going to then elevate Brianne's question to see if Judy wants to end with that one. So Jody, I'll let you unmute. But after that, after Jody speaks, Judy, could you close with an answer to this question? Do you have any strategies to address ableism in family and friends? Essentially, those that are convinced you just need to find a novel cure and cannot see that you are competent in your current body. So Jody first, please. Jody, 1 minute, and then Judy, if you can address that question. So if you're still there, Jody, 1 minute, take it away. Jody, if you're not,
I'm here,
okay, perfect. Go for it.
I'll be really quick. So what I wanted to comment on, and I don't know if I could be really quick with this, but I'll try. I have cerebral palsy, so when I go to healthcare providers, I always looked at like the standard that I feel like, okay, Jody has to deal with these issues. These are what we have to look out for. And I'm also speaking to medical students. I have a privilege of doing that. And I always feel bad because, yes, I can tell them my experiences and I try to explain to them others, but I always feel like I'm the standard because of my privilege of being intellectual and being able to speak and things like that. But I always want to get other people's stories out and to have people say things differently. And I just gonna talk about different ways that could be done. But I know we have to be really fast. And I'm sorry if I didn't make any sense.
You are great, Jody, and I appreciate that perspective. And so thank you for that. I'm only rushing because I know Judy has to go and Brianne's been waiting for that one question. So if you feel like you can, Judy, in a couple 30 seconds or so to address that point of people that just feel that we need a novel cure and can't see that we are competent in our own current bodies. And we'll wrap that up.
I mean, it makes you laugh, right? Because there's so many disabilities. It's like thousands of novel cures. And then we will keep guns. And in the United States, you will have more guns. So we will assure that however many quote unquote novel cures we maybe could come up with, our guns are here. They're becoming more proliferation. So, you know, and violence against women and others, those unfortunate things are there for a long time until we make some bigger societal changes. I think what I, in closing, want to say is, there isn't an answer to any of these questions. We are talking about systemic reforms, and we understand that. And I think it gets back to something that Lindsay and you were saying earlier, and that is we are really needing to continue to work on the inclusion of disability in every aspect of life. So whether it's work or community living or school or housing, personal assistance, technology, just general, how do we as a community, hold on, okay, can you get, yeah. We're in the foyer of my apartment, guys. So the door is knocking all at the same time. I think these are discussions that you need to have with the core group of people that are working in different areas. And this means that, like you're discussing race and sexual orientation, on and on, disability needs to be an equally important part of the discussion. And disability as an equally important part of the discussion means you need to be discussing disability and race and sexual orientation and religion and whatever the diversity exists within the community. And it's really, I think it's passing many batons and having a way of establishing a group of people, organizations that others can go to, can speak with, setting up, benchmarks. And I think really creating opportunities for people to learn together and to hold each other accountable. No one is going to come in here and give you an answer to the plethora of questions that you all have. Once you start looking at disability and the breadth, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people with mental health disabilities, people whose disabilities come and go, people who acquire their disabilities in midlife when they're older. There are so many issues that there needs to be a way of checking in and really allowing people to continue to talk about how things have been improving, where they're not, where we need to be focusing attention to try to both share positive changes that are occurring and where we need to hone in. I think if we look at COVID, that is really a perfect example. The biases, the ableism against disabled people completely appeared when COVID came out. And when we look at the number of people who died who were quote unquote had underlying conditions, all of which were disabilities, diabetes, hypertension, etc. Those are all disabilities. We didn't discuss them as disabilities. We didn't so, it's like really, if you put a disability lens on the work that you're doing, just like on race, religion, sexual orientation, and taking those lenses and allowing them to come together and come apart where they need to be. That's why I think as healthcare providers, it's so important. And, when I look at this screen, it's a reasonably diverse group of people. And that diversity in and of itself is so very important. And looking at ways that people can convene and talk and, I feel like it's a little silly because you all know these things. I don't think I'm saying anything that some of you have not already thought a lot about. And I bet everyone on this Zoom call today has thought about multiple issues. like this. And I gotta go. So, good luck. Thank you.
So we want to thank you so much, Judy. Have a wonderful day, and we'll close things out together from here.
And I'd love to know what happens as a result.
Yeah, we will.
I wish I could come in and answer your top 100 questions.
Yeah.
But as healthcare providers, you wouldn't accept most of them anyway. So it should be. All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so it seems like we've had a really good discussion with Judy, and we've addressed a lot of things such as ableism, looking at instead of being able-bodied, being non-disabled, because most of us will experience some sort of disability at some point in our life. And so we really need to, if we are experiencing disability or we are part of the able-bodied community, really looking at, we are a part of this disability community, whether we can walk upstairs or not. So I think this is a really good starting off point for creating a group of people that are serious about disability in healthcare and making changes in curriculum and changes in our recruitment processes. I'm going to pass it off to Rishika now so that she can go over some of the resources that are available at University of Michigan. And I just want to thank everybody for being here.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Fermi. Thank you, Megan. Thank you to everybody who came today, thinking a lot about what Judy is saying about collective power, collective organizing, the importance of having these spaces and these opportunities to touch base on specific issues, connecting specific issues to a wider national and global context that's dynamic. It was really, really amazing. And so I'm just going to really list the sponsors of this event, which are also the touch points on campus, the places where you could go to connect with individuals, with organizations, with activities that can really help us to strengthen our anti-ableist campus. And so those sponsors, Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services, Michigan Medicine Office for Health Equity and Inclusion, Michigan Medicine PD&E and Nursing Department, the Council for Disability Concerns, and the UMSN Disability and Nursing Association. Please reach out. Thank you again, Lindsay and Fermi, and all. And I hope you have a great day.